What's good, everybody? I'm Keandre, this is HoopIntellect, and welcome back to the channel. We finally made it to the end of the year with the draft right around the corner. We've obviously got the last board of the year here. Now this might be a little bit longer of a board just because I wanted to approach it as a sort of guide while also talking about some of the recent things that have been going on, and I wanted to give some more detail on some of those towards the end that we just didn't have as much time to talk about throughout the year. But yeah, we'll go with the top 60 first as always, and then we'll get into some of those who are ranked and tiered out to the top 100. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and let's go ahead and get into it. Now, Flagg is this year's #1 overall prospect and one of the best that we've seen in recent history. As a 6'9" wing/forward, his ability to make a terrific impact defensively, score in multiple ways, make plays, and the emergence of his game as a self-creator make him an obvious top pick and one that the numbers back up in a significant way. It'll be fun to watch how he grows and develops in Dallas into what I believe will eventually be one of the best players in the league, and while I think generational is a bit of a high bar, he's far too competitive to put a lot of limits on. Now, Dylan Harper has been the #2 prospect on my board the entirety of the year, and he lands here also in a slight tier of his own. He's a 6'5", 6'6" guard who can get downhill and finish with the best of them, and the level of craft and upside he has as a playmaker keep him the clearest star bet beyond Flagg. Sure, the pull-up shooting is going to have to improve for him to get there, but that's the type of thing you work with at the top of the draft, especially with everything else that he brings to the table. VJ Edgecombe is the #3 player on the board and a firm top 5 level guy in the class to me. As a 6'5" guard, his combination of elite athleticism, defensive playmaking, and scoring upside present what I think is both a high ceiling and a relatively high floor as a contributor. Now, for him to reach those higher end outcomes, he is going to have to come along as a ball handler and pull-up shooter, which, don't get me wrong, it is going to be a process, and the team who picks him will have to have a plan and structure for him to get there, but I would rather bet on him in this aspect than some of the others in this tier becoming as impactful in some other meaningful spots. Knibble made an excellent case for himself as one of the best prospects in the class this year. He was the second best player on a Final Four team and showed an elite shot, skill as a passer and decision maker, and was a consistent competitor. My biggest hangup has been in how he builds on it into becoming more of a threatening pull-up shooter and self-creator to deliver top 5 value. He's just not a great athlete, and some others have a pretty stark advantage as a pull-up shooter, at least at the moment, but he's a hard player to dislike. I'm betting on some of those things coming to fruition, and I'd be surprised if he wasn't at worst a major contributor on a winning team. Ace Bailey has been as interesting a prospect as I've scouted the last several years. He has terrific gifts as a 6'8", 6'9" shot maker and had some of the most ridiculous single game performances doing it. He was inconsistent defensively, but I think the tools are there to become at least above average on that end, so that's a combination that everybody would be interested in some capacity. Now, because he's a mediocre ball handler and decision maker who isn't super efficient yet, it has led to a range in opinions, and the noise surrounding him being unwilling to work out for teams and seemingly wanting free reign in wherever he ends up has added to that conversation. I'm not at all concerned about his character. I think that that's getting misconstrued here. I'm just more worried about his approach. I don't think the strategy to get to a certain spot in the draft is insane or even irregular at all, but I also don't think opportunity has ever guaranteed longevity in the league, and because of some of his flaws, I'd be curious in how willing he is to lean into some of those other parts of his game. Now, he's still too talented to keep out of this range for me. I would gladly move him back if I thought that that's where he belonged, but it might take some growing pains early on. Trey Johnson put together one of the most impressive shot-making seasons we've seen from a freshman, especially playing in this SEC. So an elite shooter who can also make a play at 6'6" with a 6'10" wingspan is an easy player to like. Now, I've struggled on where exactly to value him because of the driving and finishing concerns that could keep him from being more than a weapon shooter, and defensively he just wasn't very good. There's a volatile archetype in the league right now, but he is the type of worker that could put the pieces together, and that's why I'm slightly more bought in than I was when I finished his scouting report. Duke's Kaman Malawaj has a lot to like as a legitimate 7-footer who can finish plays at an excellent rate, protect the rim, and actually serve as more than a drop big, which is unique for someone his size and age. So he has a clear way that he'll impact games. Now, his lack of passing and creation skills are my only hesitation. I think that means that he'll have to shoot it to be more than just a good starter, but he should be one of the more important contributors in the class. Derek Queen is one of a few prospects around this area that's been somewhat difficult to place. I really like his skill set as a 6'10 big who scores inside, has great footwork, and the ability to make a play for others in multiple areas of the floor. But because he's not a reliable rim protector and anchor on defense to lead a team at the 5 and also hasn't shot it to be a more projectable 4, that makes him a really interesting player, though he will probably spend time playing both. I still value the physicality, the playmaking, and touch combination, and he's been a better mover defensively than he's gotten credit, so that's why he's still here. But where he ends up will certainly have a big say in his NBA success, at least early on in his career. Now here, obviously Coop is in a tier by himself. There's less of a gap between Harper and the rest, but he is still easily the guy I think has the next best chance to deliver all-star value, so he's by himself as well. And in the group after that is where it starts to get closer together for me. All have major pluses, but some drawbacks that could shift a lot. And it was kind of difficult to weigh those skills between Trey, Con, and Ace specifically. Colin Murray Boyles' combination of physicality, defensive prowess, and playmaking feel has kept him one of the top prospects in the class. Even as team dependent as he might be, the shot is a major question mark and could be a reason that it doesn't completely work out for him, especially because he is undersized to play the 5 for long stretches, I would say. But if you want to say he's either a shot away or a great situation away from being a star role player, that's still a bet I'd be willing to take in the lottery considering how much he could impact winning. I think Jeremiah Fears is one of the most talented players in the draft, and though it's not everything, stepping into college basketball a year early and having the type of high-end moments he did is still extremely impressive. Now he is a guard who needs the ball to be effective, he hasn't shot it well and can struggle to finish effectively, which is a combination that can kind of sound the alarms, even as impressive a ball handler and advantage creator he is. But with all that in mind, I'd be willing to bet on him right inside the top 10 in the right spot, but the top 5-6 range that he's often mocked would have me a little more hesitant. Now Noah Asingay is probably the class's biggest wild card, and though I am fairly high on him, I have found him to be a little difficult to project. As a young 18-year-old, he stepped into the German league, produced at a great rate, helped them get to the finals, and a 6'11 forward who can guard in multiple spots and has flashes as a driver and shooter is an easy sell. He's still got some question marks that are better explained in his scouting report, but he is in the mix here. Carter Bryant's game as a 6'7", 6'8 wing defender who can knock down a shot and plays well off the ball give him a clear path to contribute. Now because he's never been much of a shot creator and had next to no offensive responsibility as a freshman at Arizona, even though I thought he should have been more involved, he is going to have to develop a lot there to exceed expectations. I do believe enough in the defense and the shot to impact winning at a high level, and that's enough to consider in the late lottery. Kaspers Yakuchonis' game as a bigger guard with good feel and versatility as a passer, the ability to score it in the pick and roll in a few ways, and upside as a perimeter shot maker, especially on those step backs, keep him a potential lottery pick for me. Now I have too many questions about his ability to separate and take care of the ball to be a point guard, which puts more pressure on the shot for everything to come together, so I think there's probably better options higher than this, but what he brings is still a tough combination to find from an 18-year-old guard. Thomas Sorber is one of my favorite players in this class, and I'd assume I'm a bit higher on him than consensus. He's slightly undersized for a 5 at 6'10", but he has elite length and terrific feel for the game on both ends, but especially defensively where he was exceptional as a freshman. I do have some concerns in his explosiveness, and the shot would do wonders for his translation on offense, but he checks a ton of boxes and is someone I'd consider as high as a lottery, assuming the foot is good to go. Now this group is more high-level starter with the upside to exceed that. I really debated having CMB and Fears in that next group or split it, so that's why I added the tier break in there, but that's where we landed. Colorado State's Nick Clifford became one of the best players in college basketball this season, and despite being one of the older prospects in the class, he has clear appeal as an NBA contributor. He defends, he rebounds, he can knock down a three, he can serve as a secondary playmaker. He checks all the boxes that you'd want from a complimentary player, and though the shot continuing to be reliable will be key to his success, I think there's enough there to feel good about taking him in the top 20, though he could realistically end up being drafted lower than that in what I would consider a steal. Now, Cedric Howard had one of the wilder late rises in the draft that we're going to see, but as a 6'6" wing with a 7-foot wingspan and the tools to both shoot it and defend at a great rate, there's definite reason to be intrigued. Now, because he didn't play much high major competition and hasn't served as a true creator at any point in college, it's hard for me to find ground to base a top 10 ranking on, but he has the tools to contribute in a real way, and I love his approach to his work, so he has the upside to overachieve as a late bloomer. Walter Clayton Jr. forever etched his name in the history books this season, not just for winning a national championship, but for going on a shot-making run that we just haven't seen often, especially when you look at how important he was to that Florida offense. He's a 6'2", 6'3" guard who is a top 3 shooter in this class in my book. He's dynamic off the bounce, he can play off the ball, and has made some strides as a passer over the years. Now, in order to fully maximize that talent, he will need to continue getting better as a decision maker and cut out some of those defensive lapses. But even as an older guard, what he does is difficult to find and should probably be valued a little higher than he'll get drafted. Jace Richardson is probably the most surprising name to not get a green room invite to the draft. Now, that doesn't mean that he won't still go in the first round, but naturally, a 6'1" guard who has spent most of his time playing off the ball has a split on where he could end up. I still like him a lot. I think he knows how to play in a way that a lot of others don't. He can shoot it, he makes little mistakes, and it's all backed up statistically. He's just small, and we know how difficult it is to cut through there. Rasheer Fleming has a type of tools that are easy to love as a 6'8", 6'9" forward who can defend in multiple spots and has grown significantly as a three-point shooter over the years. Now, because that isn't a truly bankable skill and he can't do much with the ball, that's had his stock fluctuate a little bit here late, but I still think a guy who can guard in multiple spots, might be big enough to play some 5 and also space the floor, has a good chance of being a positive piece. Joan Berenger is one of the more interesting upside plays, and his development over the last year has been pretty rapid. He went from a decent junior club player with some great flashes to a legitimate contributor at the Euro Cup and Adriatic League levels as a 17, 18-year-old. And he has a clear path to make his mark in the league as a bouncy rim runner and rim protector who moves well across the court. Now, he's still pretty raw, he lacks touch at the rim, he's not a good passer, and there are times that he's all over the place positionally on defense, but the tools, the energy, the activity, it's all there for a very young guy, and while I'm not lottery bought in on him, I'm definitely more into him as a prospect. Noah Penda has a super intriguing game as a 6'8" forward/wing who is one of the best defenders in this class, is also physical and thrives making a connective play on offense. Now, that offense is more of a work in progress both from 3 and at the rim than I would have liked, even though he has taken some major steps from outside, but the other stuff is enough for a team to invest in and why I'm maybe slightly higher than consensus, because if that shot ever gets there even slightly, he'll be an impact player. I'm as curious to see how Adu Thero develops as anyone in this range. He's a big-time athlete on the wing with good physical tools. He can defend and make plays all over the floor and is probably one of the best in that regard in this group. And he grew into a compelling slasher this year at Arkansas. Now, pretty much everything hinges on the shot with him, in my opinion. There's some situations where he could still play without it, but the shot is far enough away that it'll make having a significant impact tougher until that changes. Now, there's still enough positive tools to have him in the first round mix because he's another guy who, if that shot does get there, he could have a chance of delivering lottery value. Now, these next 2 tiers have a lot less separation, and for every team in the back half of the first round, I'd have a different looking order. I still tried to reflect who I think has the best chances to contribute in a significant way, and that's what this first group ended up looking like. Creighton's Ryan Kalkbrenner has one of the easiest prospect pitches in the class as a legitimate 7-footer with a 9'4" standing reach who has protected the rim at a great level over his career, and on the other end has the 6th best field goal percentage for a career since 1993. He's very good in drop but isn't scheme versatile and doesn't have a ton of playmaking value on offense as an older guy, but as a rotation big and someone that could immediately add value, I think he makes sense and his production is worth betting on. Will Riley is someone I'm just slightly higher on heading into the draft after rewatching some of his late season performances. He's a lanky 6'8" wing who has some excellent moments as a shot maker and got a lot better driving and making plays down the stretch. Now he's far from being physically ready, the defense isn't where it needs to be, and he has some alarming steal and block rates, so you're probably not picking him and expecting him to be a rotation player on a good team early, but he has the tools to be an eventual impact guy and someone worth betting on in the first for a team that thinks they can get him up to speed. Yegor Dimon has been one of the more polarizing players in the draft and has somehow become even more controversial the further we've gotten from games. I think his workouts have convinced some that he's still a lottery level guy, but I just can't get there. He's still an interesting prospect as a 6'9" guard who can really pass it and at least has some moments as a straight line driver, but I think it's going to take quite a bit of development and added aggression for him to access that passing as a playmaker. So if he does some of those things and the shot becomes decent, there's a world where he makes all of this look dumb, but he's felt a little more theoretical than I'd like, though I'd assume he goes higher than this on draft night. Denny Wolf's skill set as a 7-footer who can handle it, potentially space the floor, and make a play is bound to attract a lot of interest, and like I mentioned before, he really was one of my favorites to watch, flaws included. Now his NBA projection is a little more uncertain to me because he's in this weird middle point between needing to be a playmaker but being turnover prone and probably not one of an NBA team's best with the ball. He also doesn't project well as a play finisher and doing those traditional things, and then defensively he's not a rim protector at the 5, so I think it's a little more complicated than the highlights might show, but I'd be willing to take a chance on his skill set because it is valuable and unique. Asa Newell had a great freshman season at Georgia. He made a consistent impact finishing plays at the bucket and being a versatile defensive piece as a 6'9" forward. Now because he's not quite big enough or astute enough a rim protector to be a full-time 5 and hasn't shot it or been much of a playmaker, he's another guy in an interesting spot. I think if he shoots it, he'll be just fine as a contributor and I've become more confident that he can, but the lack of ball skills and playmaking don't make his ceiling particularly high to me, though he is still in this range for a reason. Liam McNeely came in as a 5-star prospect joining the back-to-back national champions, but things didn't go nearly as well for this group, and he specifically dealt with a bad high ankle sprain that kept him out a month in the middle of the year. Now I'm not sure he's an elite shooter, but he is going to get back to being much better than he was this year. He's also got good feel off the ball and had way too big of a creation role this year. Now with that, his issues as a defender and finisher at the rim are pretty concerning for someone of his archetype. His track record keeps him in his range for me, but I'd be hesitant to consider him higher in that teens range. Now Nolan Traore entered the year as one of the highest regarded prospects, but his issues as a shooter in these long stretches of games where he'd float and, to me, put up empty playmaking numbers that were a product of design and not advantage creation had me more skeptical of him as a prospect. And at the same time, an assist percentage over 40 with his priors and some of those late year stretches are enough to still consider him in the first round and even the top 20 with the hope that he can put it together. But I'm definitely not ruling out anything, but I would say sometime starter to good backup might be the most likely outcome at this point. Now the biggest measurement surprise this year was Ben Saroff coming in at 6'6" barefoot. Despite the concerns I have in him as an NBA lead ball handler and the fact that he hasn't had a ton of success doing much else, that's a really big guard with some great craft and high level moments as a passer. He's a little better attacking off the catch than I often give him credit. Now I don't really buy the shot in a substantial way, and I think the handle is subpar for what he needs as a lead guy, but he's at least a shot away from being really interesting, and his play in the German League Finals has stood out in a significant way. Stanford's Maxime Reynaud is a 7-footer who brings a lot of offensive value. He can space the floor, he can score inside, he can drive a closeout. There's just a lot there for him to explore in the NBA. I'd like to be a lot higher on him because the offense is there in a way that I think can completely change the dimensions of the floor for your team if it goes right. But while improved, his issues as a rim protector and perimeter defender just make it difficult. But I am still in on him as a first rounder. Now Drake Powell didn't have the best one and done campaign at UNC, but a 6'6" wing with a 7-foot wingspan that can defend on the perimeter and is a good athlete still has some first round appeal. Now he was super limited offensively, whether you want to blame that on coaching or him having times where he didn't even look at the bucket. That's up to you, but I think he's far enough away on that end, even with some of the stuff that he showed off the bounce coming into the year. Ultimately, as a long-term play and someone who just needs a reliable 3-ball to be in the mix, I think he's worth considering for sure. Hugo Gonzalez is a 6'7" wing out of Spain who has shown a lot of promise in the past, but didn't do much in limited minutes for a competitive Real Madrid team. I like the energy he plays with, especially defensively. He has some nice moments off the ball and flashes as a self-creator, especially dating back to the last couple years of international competition, but the shooting and decision-making struggles and also a lack of elite physical tools make him more of a late first round type of swing to me. I'm still a believer in Cam Jones as a prospect. His combination of craft, role versatility, shot making, and improvement as a passer still move the needle. Now, he's not a great athlete, but we have a large sample of him being an integral piece on great college basketball teams in different roles and finding a way to produce. If he had shot it better this year, I'm pretty confident he'd have more fans of him in that late first round range. That's still where I'd start to consider him, but should he fall to the mid-second like he has in some mocks, he might end up a steal. Now, if I did this tomorrow or yesterday, I'd probably come up with a slightly different order, but this is who I'd consider most in the first round, along with maybe these next couple names that we'll talk about. Bogoje Markovic is someone that I thought might take that opportunity to go to college for a year given the current landscape of things, but he stayed in this draft and I think he's a really interesting player. He's a good ball handler at 6'11", he can make a play in the open floor, he's got some moments as a floor spacer and can convert inside, but he is pretty skinny and I wonder exactly where he defends and plays in the league, though he's still worth a longer term investment. Hansen Young has the most long-term upside of anyone that'll likely end up in the second round. He's a 7'2" center out of China with a knack for making plays operating as a hub and scoring in the post. He put up big numbers in the CBA, which is not a very good league and there's no reason to really argue about it, but he's super skilled and he looked the part in the combine in a way that was very encouraging. Now he's got a ways to go on defense. He's going to have to leave the majority of those post-ups behind and make that adjustment to screening and playing more above the break and as a delay guy, but man, it's easy to get excited about his gifts and I kind of think this might end up being too low. Yannick Koning-Niederhauser has a lot of appeal as a 7-footer who is a very good athlete, can finish lobs around the rim, and has had moments of excellence as a shot blocker, and it's easy to envision him playing a role in an NBA rotation. Now he's a little rougher around the edges than you'd like from an older big, his positioning on defense can be spotty, he's a little more mobile than he is switchable right now, and his limitations as a passer and his touch around the rim may cap his ceiling on offense, but the tools are clearly there for him to be an NBA rotation big, and he's someone who would be at the top of my list on day 2 of the draft. Javon Small was probably the most underrated player in the country this year. He carried the load for that West Virginia team in an admirable way and showed a complete game at the guard spot. He is small and older, but his ability to shoot it off the pull-up and the catch, attack the bucket, and make plays in the pick and roll were really impressive, and he's had some good moments at the point of attack defensively. Now it is difficult to break through at his size, but he's firmly in the draftable mix for me, even though there's a good chance that he might end up on a 2-way. Tyrese Proctor's evolution into a reliable 3-and-D off guard who can connect the dots as a passer and occasional shot creator was huge for Duke this season, and I think he can carry that into the league. He's not quite consistent or physical enough to be higher on him, and I think if any one of the defense, the shooting, or passing was a notch or two better, he'd be a lot more interesting, especially as a junior. But he's another guy who's definitely towards the top of my list as you get into the second round. I think people are generally lower on Jamir Watkins than I would have anticipated, but I am still pretty bought in. He is a very old prospect, which naturally puts a cap on where you take someone like him, but I buy the defense on the wing and think that he's got an extra gear there. He's physically ready for the NBA and has become a decent enough spot shooter and finisher over the years. Now that's not enough to guarantee anything, and I'd probably hold off on picking him too high if I'm a team just for value purposes, but again, I do think there's enough there. Janai Broome was one of the best players in the country the last couple years and had a terrific career starting out at Morehead State. Despite being a subpar athlete, he's been tough to keep from scoring on the interior and has won with his positioning and hands-on defense in a significant way. Now, he's a little undersized for a 5. He's not someone that you're worried about as a shooter, and when I watch him, I just kind of have a hard time believing that the production is going to translate in the same ways, but he's a good basketball player with numbers that I do value, and that's enough to keep him an early second-round pick. Alex Tui's game as a complimentary wing keep him firmly in this early second round mix, as he's just solid at a lot of things and has good size and feel for the game. Now, he probably doesn't have an elite skill. He still needs to continue progressing as a three-point shooter and as an athlete, but he does more than enough to be an eventual rotation bet. Chaz Lanier made an immediate impact transferring from North Florida to Tennessee, and as a 6'5 wing with a 6'9 wingspan that's one of the class's best shooters, he has clear appeal. Now, he's probably not any more than decent defensively. He doesn't have too much to offer as a playmaker, but he can absolutely shoot it and could find his way in a situation that's looking for just that. Duke's Sion James is a physical off guard who defends at a high level, can knock down shots and make a play when needed, and most importantly, just makes consistently good decisions. I wish he was either a little bigger or more capable as both a driver and shooter, because things would be a lot easier for him, but there's enough there to see him carving out a role, and we saw him impact winning in a significant way this year. I really like the upside of Young and Markovic. I don't 100% know who they are in the league, but at this part of the draft, they'd be super intriguing. And overall, think second round guarantees, upside plays, and potential contributors with this group. Micah Peavy's defensive instincts and tenacity keep him a really interesting second rounder even as an older player. The pitch for him is just wing defender who is a solid decision maker and made massive strides as a shooter. Now, that part of his game is still in question, and if you don't buy it, I get not being very interested considering it took a long time, and he obviously doesn't project as someone who will have the ball, but the defense and energy is good enough that in the right situation, he could break through and earn multiple contracts. Kentucky's Amari Williams has some fun tools as a 7-footer who can operate as a hub, finish plays at the bucket, and help on the glass and take up space. He's not great on the perimeter on defense. I think he's okay at the rim, but he's had issues with consistency, and offensively, he'll need to acclimate to far less post-ups than he's had throughout his career. But as a physical DHO man and someone I think will make that adjustment as a roller, he has a chance at sticking as at least a third big. Kobe Brea is another one of these prospects with a really simple pitch. He's 6'7" in shoes and had one of the best shooting careers for a college player that you're ever going to see. That's really all you need to hear. He's not particularly gifted as a playmaker. He's had some solid defensive moments and isn't small, but he hasn't been very active. Ultimately, he has an elite skill, and in the right spot, he could 100% play this same role in the league. I was extremely high on Rocco Zakarsky coming into the season as a 7'3" big man who can protect the rim, finish plays, and operate a little as a passer, but injuries and a lack of serious playing time made this year effectively a scratch. I'd be nervous taking someone his size with the lower body issues he's had already, but if he can be healthy, a guy that size that can move a little and do the requisite things on offense has appeal, and though I wish he gave us another year before starting that NBA clock, he has some of the most upside in this second round. I was pretty surprised by John Tonje's breakout All-American and shooter after being more of a compliment earlier in his career. I have some big questions in how he separates against NBA length, and the defense hasn't been great, especially with the context of him being 24, but he was very good this season, and I think there's value there in a second. At this point, I feel like one of the very few who still thinks RJ Lewis should be drafted. Now, would he have benefited from another year in college, potentially making more money? Sure, but the wing defense, the energy, the shot making improvements, there is still some good stuff there. Now, he's not a good decision maker, and I probably overlooked some of his flaws in that department just because that entire St. John's team was a walk and rock fight offensively, but I like him as a mid to late second rounder as a wing defender who isn't a lost cause as a scoring option. I'm not quite as into VCU's Max Shulga as a prospect as some others, but I do think he's really solid. He's an impressive shooter with good feel as a playmaker and a level of craft and ball screens. And he was playing some of the most efficient basketball in the country before, that tournament game. Athletically, he's behind for an NBA guard on both ends, but thinking about a dribble, pass, shoot guy with size and some fight on defense, it should at least be worth a two-way. Flagg Golden has appeal as a 7-footer with a 7'5" wingspan and the ability to score with his touch at the rim and take up space on defense. He's got some impressive footwork inside as well, and though I have some concerns about him as a mover on the perimeter and he is another really old prospect, there's a shot that he could become a back-end rotation big and give a team some size that they don't have. Florida's Elijah Martin is a winner, and we saw that throughout his college career. I have more questions about his value at the NBA level, but there's always room for bringing in someone who defends all over the floor, plays with a ton of energy, and has at least been respectable as a shooter. Now, he's a 6'1" off guard who is basically a small wing and connected piece, which is not exactly what NBA teams are looking for, but in most classes, but especially one like this, I think you just look for the winners late and kind of see what happens. Kobe Sanders has a fun game as a big wing playmaker that can really score it in the pick and roll and get to his mid-range pull-up. He's helped himself a lot through the pre-draft process and should have a good chance of getting drafted at this point. I really like the offensive skill set and the highs were impressive, but at his age, he's probably too behind physically and as an overall defender to be all in, at least as more than a second-round flyer. Auburn's Dylan Cardwell just had a knack for making impressive plays his entire career, even when he was playing limited minutes earlier on, and his appeal has grown as the draft pool shrunk this year. He's a physical big who was one of the most impactful defenders in the country. He moves well, he can make a play as a rotator, and he finishes everything at the rim with a dunk. Now, he's a bad free throw shooter, he doesn't have great length and can't do much with the ball, but as an energy big, he's fairly high on my list of two-way guys. Hunter Salas had a big-time breakout season last year as a junior, and it reignited the draft buzz that was there as he got to Gonzaga. He didn't return this year with the best performance, but he's got some real appeal as a long-arm two-guard who can make shots in a variety of ways and has been a solid connective playmaker. Now, he's still pretty skinny, and I think his archetype is just difficult to break through in if you're not truly elite at least one thing, but at this point, he's definitely worth considering with the two-way. Ryan Nembhard is someone who made a good impression at the combine, and his body of work as a passer isn't rivaled by many in this class. Now, he's a 6-foot guard who has never been much of an outside threat or the type of aggressive scorer that gets a lot of responsibility, so it is going to be a road to find an NBA role, but he's another guy who just knows how to play. Nebraska's Bryce Williams was one of the best bucket getters in the Big Ten and has some decent size and physical tools. He's good off the catch, he plays well in the pick and roll and uses his body well, and that 43-point game against Ohio State that went to double overtime was about as fun a performance as there was last year. He's an older guy who I have some concerns about defensively, but in this range, somewhere in the mid to late second, I think he's just fine. Tamar Bates had a very good senior season at Missouri, but made a big impression throughout the pre-draft process. His game as a 3-and-D off guard who can defend in multiple spots, makes good decisions, and can knock down open threes is certainly worth considering. He's not doing a whole lot outside of that. He's also not an elite or super physical defender either, but he's a good basketball player with a great personality and should win over some teams. Lakeland Oldbridge had a fantastic process on top of a productive season in the NBL, and as an energetic forward with some skill and prowess finishing with his touch and craft, it makes him an interesting two-way player. He's a bit of a tweener who doesn't shoot and doesn't really do much defensively. However, he's another one of these guys who just knows how to play, and I think is worth taking a chance on. And here's a look back at the entire top 60 before we get into the top 100. Now, this last tier of players we talked about kind of flows into this first group that I'd also consider with two ways. In general, this part of the ranking is by far the most ambitious just because there is so many guys, almost all of which won't pan out in the league but should have a lot of success overseas. So they're in consideration for two ways, Exhibit 10/training camp deals and summer league deals as well. And keep in mind, these labels are even more fluid than the tiers on the board, and are pretty dependent on team situation and what exactly they're looking for. Now there's some interesting players here still, obviously the guys towards the top like the Brooks Barnheiser. I still have a little faith in Dink Pate, Eric Dixon, we talked about him last time I believe. So there's definitely some guys at the top, but there's also several defenders with questions offensively but still have some appeal. So guys like Chris Mannion, Cam Matthews, Jemai Meshack, Isaac Noguez, Kadari Richmond, and even a few others bring something that I still think is worth kicking the tires on. You've got a range of shooters here as well, from the Zeke Mayos and Curtis Jones to John Poulikitis, Jackson Robinson, who is finally getting healthy off that wrist injury and has been able to work out here leading up to the draft. I was really high on Woogle Poplar a couple years ago, and I still think he's worth considering as an athletic 3-and-D off guard. So I'll be interested to see where he ends up or how much interest is actually there. Jalen Moore would have been higher on here, but he tore his Achilles right before the draft, which is just terrible news. I hope he still ends up getting an opportunity eventually, but that's obviously thrown some stuff off here, and he was ranked a little bit higher before. Now I wouldn't imagine there's too many, but there's probably a few that slip through the cracks just because of how much time it takes to feel good about having opinions on this many players, at least for me personally, with all the moving parts here and all that. But yeah, that's the 2025 draft class. I appreciate y'all for watching and supporting another year of stuff that we've got going on over here. I'll probably do some type of recap maybe after day 1 if I can turn it around fast enough, but definitely after day 2. So be on the lookout for that, and also be sure to follow me on Twitter leading up to the draft and also during, if you haven't already. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. If you did, be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you are new to the channel, and leave a comment down below of who you think will be the biggest steal of the 2025 draft. As always, I'm Keandre. This is HoopIntellect. Until next time, I'm out.
Like, there's one of those HoopIntellect had some really good YouTube videos. Shout out to that guy.
I don't understand why you watch. Do you not have synergy access?
No, but I like the YouTube guys where the guy tells me the strengths and weaknesses. I like those clips. There's a HoopIntellect does a good one.